We will be reading from Daniel 2, the whole chapter. You can find it on the screen. You can find it at home on your live stream, or, of course, in your Bibles. And let's take a moment to pray. Father, we thank you for your word, Lord, that in a world that is torn and divided and at odds with each other, that we can have your word to unite us together. And we admit that it often doesn't do that. But Lord, would you use it to speak to us? Would we learn from it? And would we be brought closer to you and to your church as a whole? Amen. Nebuchadnezzar's dream. In the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. His spirit was troubled, and his sleep left him. Then the king commanded that the magicians, the enchanters, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans be summoned to tell the king his dreams. So they came in and they stood before the king. And the king said to them, I had a dream, and my spirit is troubled to know the dream. Then the Chaldeans said to the king in Aramaic, O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will show the interpretation. The king answered and said to the Chaldeans, The word from me is firm. If you do not make known to me the dream and its interpretation, you shall be torn limb from limb, and your houses shall be laid in ruins. But if you show the dream and its interpretation, you shall receive from me gifts and rewards and great honor. Therefore, show me the dream and its interpretation. They answered a second time and said, Let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will show its interpretation. The king answered and said, I know with certainty that you are trying to gain time, because you see that the word from me is firm. If you do not make the dream known to me, there is but one sentence for you. You have agreed to speak lying and corrupt words before me till the times change. Therefore, tell me the dream, and I shall know that you can show me its interpretation. The Chaldeans answered the king and said, There is not a man on earth who can meet the king's demand, for no great and powerful king has asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or Chaldean. The thing that the king asks is difficult, and no one can show it to the king except the gods, whose dwelling is not with the flesh. Because of this, the king was angry and very furious, and commanded that all the wise men of Babylon be destroyed. So the decree went out, and the wise men were about to be killed, and they sought Daniel and his companions to kill them. Then Daniel replied with prudence and discretion to Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, who had gone out to kill the wise men of Babylon. He declared to Arioch, the king's captain, Why is the decree of the king so urgent? Then Arioch made the matter known to Daniel. And Daniel went in and requested the king to appoint him a time, that he might show the interpretation of the king. God reveals Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Then Daniel went to his house and made the matter known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions, and told them to seek mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that Daniel and his companions might not be destroyed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Then the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision of the night. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Daniel answered and said, Blessed be the God of heaven forever and ever, to whom belong wisdom and might. He changes times and seasons. He removes kings and sets up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells with him. To you, O God of my fathers, I give thanks and praise, for you have given me wisdom and might, and have made known to me what we asked of you, for you have made known to us the king's matter. Therefore, Daniel went into Arioch, whom the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went and said thus to him, Do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. Bring me in before the king, and I will show the king the interpretation. Then Arioch brought in Daniel before the king in haste, and said thus to him, I have found among the exiles from Judah a man who will make known to the king the interpretation. The king declared to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, Are you able to make known to me the dream that I have seen and its interpretation? Daniel answered the king and said, No wise men, enchanters, magicians, or astrologers can show to the king the mystery that the king has asked. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar that will be in the latter days. Your dream and the visions of your head as you lay in bed are these. To you, O king, as you lay in bed, came thoughts of what would be after this, and he who reveals mysteries made known to you what is to be. But as for me, this mystery has been revealed to me, not because of any wisdom that I have, more than of the living, but in order that the interpretation may be made known to the king, and that you may know the thoughts of your mind. You saw, O king, and behold, a great image. This image, mighty and of exceeding brightness, stood before you, and its appearance was frightening. The head of this image was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its middle and thighs of bronze, and its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. As you looked, a stone was cut out by no human hand, and it struck the image on its feet of iron and clay, and broke them in pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold all together were broken in pieces, and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away, so that not a trace of them could be found. But the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. This was the dream. Now we will tell the king its interpretation. You, O king, the King of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power and the might and the glory, and into whose hand he has given, wherever they dwell, the children of man, the beasts of the field, and the birds of the heavens, making you rule over them all. You are the head of gold. Another kingdom inferior to you shall rise after you, and yet a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth. And there shall be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, because iron breaks to pieces and shatters all things. And like iron that crushes, it shall break and crush all of these. And as you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, it shall be a divided kingdom. But some of the firmness of iron shall be in it, just as you saw iron mixed with the soft clay. And as the toes of the feet were partly iron and partly clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly brittle. As you saw the iron mixed with soft clay, so they will mix with one another in marriage, but they will not hold together, just as iron does not mix with clay. And in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, nor shall the kingdom be left to another people. It shall break in pieces all these kingdoms and bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever, just as you saw that a stone was cut from a mountain by no human hand, and that it broke in pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold. A great God has made known to the king what shall be after this. The dream is certain, and its interpretation is sure. Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell upon his face and paid homage to Daniel, and commanded that an offering and incense be offered up to him. The king answered and said to Daniel, Truly, your God is God of gods and Lord of kings, and a revealer of mysteries, for you have been able to reveal this mystery. Then the king gave Daniel high honors and many great gifts, and made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon, and chief prefect over all the wise men of Babylon. Daniel made a request of the king, and he appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon. But Daniel remained at the king's court. This is the word of the Lord.
When you have nightmares, when your life is troubled, what do? How do you respond? Some people, it seems, when they face the hard times, kind of try to bury their head in the sand and say, the sun will come out tomorrow, everything's going to be fine, let's just not worry about it. Some people actually say, well, there's nothing we can do about it, we're all just basically doomed to our fate, and so we just keep going, and there's kind of a pessimism, not really an optimism, just a kind of sense that it's going to be what it's going to be. There's nothing we can do about it. Let's just keep going. And then there's other people who say when they're troubled and worried, they get going, they get to work, they're driven. They're going to do everything they can to try to stop what's looking like it's going to be bad and to actually make whatever they can good for their lives possible. They're going to work, and work some more. And then there's some people that seem to be able to live out what some of the t-shirts in the last few years have been showing, and it's like, keep calm and carry on. And they actually live it. They're not just saying it. They actually have this calm, this poise, this peace, even in the midst of the trouble that they face. And what's amazing about the story you've just heard read to you is that our story is basically an incredible case study of how to respond to troubled times. It's this amazing insight as to how we can actually face hard times by looking at different people in the story and how they actually interact, act, and actually show us their response to the trouble and the difficulties they face. And so what I'd like to do today is walk you through this story and look at the main characters. First, we'll look at a troubled king. Second, we'll look at a poised servant, calm and collected. And then third, we'll look at a praiseworthy God. And following that, we will see what a fitting response to all of these different things, these people that we meet, what a fitting response is. Okay, so a troubled king, a poised servant, a praiseworthy king, a fitting response. First, a troubled king. We meet Nebuchadnezzar. He's the king of Babylon. He is the most powerful man in the entire earth at the time. And he is reigning and ruling in all of his power, and yet he has a dream, and the dream, it says, troubles him. His sleep leaves him in verse 1, and then later on he tells his wise men, the collection of people who should be able to help him out in this situation, he tells them that he wants them to interpret the dream and to tell him what the dream is because it's so troubling him. And he doesn't say why it's troubling him, but as we see the dream later on in the story, we realize that this is a dream of some massive image that's made of these different precious metals all the way down to clay and iron at the bottom. And there's probably something in him that says when this rock comes out of nowhere and smashes it all to pieces, he's wondering, is this a sign of my demise? Is this a sign of my fall? And he wants to know. And so he calls in his wise men, he calls in these people who should be able to help him, and he basically demands that they not only interpret it, but tell him the dream too, because, as verse 9 seems to be indicating, because he doesn't trust them. He thinks that they're actually just going to string him along and tell him whatever, in a sense, he might want to hear. Why? Because he's saying they're biding their time until the times change, until the new empire, until the new person in charge comes to power, until Babylon is in somebody else's hands or a new empire has taken place. He's basically not trusting any of these guys to tell him the truth. And so in order to stop that from happening, and in order to keep them from lying to him, he basically says, you're going to tell me the interpretation of the dream and the dream too, so I know that you guys are telling the truth. No one's going to pull a fast one on me. And when they say to him, O king, live forever, no one can do this. No one has ever asked, no king has ever asked this before. And then they even get to the point where they say, look, no human being can do this. It's too difficult. Only the gods have this level of knowledge. We human beings, we don't have this ability. The king responds with fury and rage and anger and orders that every single one of them will be killed. And the order is put out, and Arioch, the captain, goes out and he begins to make this order a reality, to have all these wise men killed, including Daniel and his friends. Now, before we get into Daniel and what he looks like, let's look at this troubled king for a minute. What are we supposed to learn from Nebuchadnezzar in his reaction here? What is it that we're supposed to notice and see? And I think what we need to see here is this. Here we have the most powerful person in the world, driven by fear. He's driven by fear. He's completely at a point where he just cannot handle the situation. And he's throwing fits of rage. He's making unrealistic expectations of people around him. And he is driven by fear, looking over his shoulder in a sense, wondering who's going to be attacking him next, wondering who's going to try to take his position next. And he's living in this kind of constant state of fear and trouble. And what's amazing is he's the most powerful guy there is, and yet he's filled with such incredible fear. And we need to pause and think about that for a minute. There's this, in a sense, paradox, we might say, of power. That those who actually attain really high levels of power, instead of making them feel secure and at ease, are actually filled with greater fear. And the question is, why is that? What's going on? We begin to see in Nebuchadnezzar the fact that when you have this kind of power and you've attained that power through force and through your own act of will, you're always worried that somebody else is going to do the same to you. David Foster Wallace, the late David Foster Wallace, in a speech put it this way. He says, he connects worshiping power and this search for power and this fear together this way. He says, if you worship power, you will end up feeling weak and afraid, and you will need ever more power over others to numb you to your own fear. That's the interesting part about power, is that when you go for power, when you try to attain power, position, status, and influence over other people, and you do so with the force of your being, and in a sense, often with physical force and other ways of force, you end up living a life that's filled with fear, not security. And I think at this point, we should probably ask ourselves this. And it's tempting right now, I know, when I talk to people about these things, it's tempting to say, yeah, those people like Nebuchadnezzar, they're such terrible people. Wish they would stop being like that. But no one ever wants to admit they're like him. No one ever wants to say, I actually think I might see a little myself in this. So let me start us off. I see myself in Nebuchadnezzar. And let me give you some signs in my own heart and life, and maybe this will apply to you, of how you might be more like Nebuchadnezzar than you might want to admit. So let me give you 4 signs that this might be happening, or to some degree is a problem in your life too. 1, you live your life kind of fearing losing. You always need to win. You always got to be first or the top. And you're afraid of losing your reputation. You're afraid of losing your status. Respect is a really big deal for you. To be disrespected is something you really can't stand. And you really want people to look up to you because you are a winner. You have reached, in a sense, the top. You want people to respect you and look up to you. And when they don't, sign number 2, you get angry. And that anger is actually one of the things you tend to do, just like Nebuchadnezzar. And you take out your anger on the people around you. You take out your anger on those who don't do what you want them to do. You take out your anger on those who get in your way when you're trying to achieve what you're trying to achieve, but they're not with you or for you or helping you. And you tend to use anger as a way to threaten people and actually to get people to do what you want them to do too. And when they oppose you or when they don't do it, you lash out at them until they get in line and do what you want them to do. And then you don't realize it's happening, but the people around you, they feel mostly like you're not really loving them or caring for them, but that you're actually just using them. The people around you just feel like pawns. They feel like people who are there as long as they're doing what you're wanting to do, you're happy with them, and when you no longer see their use or when they're not doing what you want, you get rid of them and find someone else who will. And then on top of all this, you justify the way that you're living by saying, I'll take all the responsibility necessary. I'll take the weight of these things on myself. I'll take the burden on myself. I'll work really, really hard. Why? Because ultimately in the end, well, we wouldn't say it out loud. If we're like Nebuchadnezzar, we're saying, I should do this because I know how to do it best. No one else can really do it as well as I do. So if I just do it myself, it would be better. And if people want to help in certain ways, that's fine. But really, I just want to be the person in charge. I want to be the person who takes the responsibility. I'm happy to take the responsibility. And really, at the bottom, I also want the glory and the credit. That's what Nebuchadnezzar was like. That's how he lived. I can live like that too. Maybe God in his grace is showing you today that maybe you live like this a bit as well. Now, in pretty startling contrast to Nebuchadnezzar, we meet another person in our story, a poised servant. What I mean by poised is someone who's calm and collected under pressure, someone who has a sort of confidence and yet a humility at the same time. And this poised servant, this calm and collected, humble and confident servant is Daniel. And look at the contrast here. Daniel is from another country, from Judah. He's been taken by force into Babylon. He's been trained by the king's servants in all the language and all the different documents that he needs to learn about their culture. He has no earthly power really to speak of. He has really no position at this point yet at all. And he is one of the people who's now had his life threatened by this king, even though he did nothing to deserve it. And he finds out about it from the guy who comes to kill him. Because as Arioch comes to round up all the wise men and to bring them away to be executed, Daniel basically has to ask him, what's going on? Why is this happening? And Arioch begins to explain what the king demanded, how no one could do what the king demanded, and how, as a result, everybody who's a wise man, including Daniel and his three friends, are going to be executed. They're going to be killed. And what does Daniel do? Without any human power, without any human authority, without any kind of ability or status or anything like that, what does he do? He doesn't panic. He doesn't get angry. He doesn't freak out. He's poised. And what does he do? He basically asks for some time so that he can get an answer from God. And he says, just give me a bit of time and I will get your answer. I will do what I can do to see if we can find an answer to this dream. And he does it with, it says here, prudence. And he says, not only with prudence, but also with discretion, that he is actually somebody in verse 14 who has his act together and who is calm under pressure and is basically saying, before you kill everybody, let's just hit pause. And he gets a stay of execution for everyone and begins a process of seeking God. And he does it humbly. He doesn't act like he's going to be able to do this himself, because the first thing he does is he goes, finds his three friends, and he says to them, join me in praying that God would show us mercy and reveal this dream and interpretation to us. He's not going to his friends and saying, hey, you know what? Look, I got an opportunity to make a name for myself. This is my chance. No. He goes to them and says, let's seek God and his mercy, and let's ask God to do what only God can do in revealing this dream and interpretation to us. He's humble. He's not proud. He's gracious. He admits his need. He admits his desperate need for help from the only one who can help him. And what does God do? God answers his prayer. He reveals the dream and the interpretation. And what does Daniel do after receiving this dream and interpretation from God? Well, he tells the king's servant, Arioch, the captain of the guard, he says, bring me into the king. I can say the interpretation of the dream. And what does Arioch do? He walks in and says, O king, look, I found this exile from Judah who can give you the interpretation and the dream. Look at me. I, in a sense, have saved the day. He's taking some credit. He was about to kill him. And Daniel had to speak up and say, hang on, before you kill me, I might actually be the one who can help here. And then he lets him have that opportunity. And yet here he is taking credit. Sound familiar? And what does Daniel do? Does he say, yes, I am your man. I have figured it out. He could have, but he doesn't. What does he say? It's not me. I didn't do this. It's the God of heaven who gave me this ability to understand this dream and to know this dream and to understand its interpretation. It's not me. And he says it over and over again. Verse 28 and then verse 30, he says it again and again. It's not me, but it's God. Even when Nebuchadnezzar says, have you been able to do this? Daniel says, no human being can do this. Your wise men in one sense were right. No human being can do this. But the God of heaven has revealed this to me so that you, Nebuchadnezzar, can know this dream and its interpretation. And so just for a moment, consider Daniel. What a contrast to Nebuchadnezzar. No earthly power, no earthly status, no earthly resources, and yet he has this incredible poise, this calmness and this confidence and humility. And you say, why does he have that? What's different about Daniel? And the difference in Daniel is simply this, that Daniel realizes that he's not the one who has this power. He's not the one who can make this happen, but he believes and trusts in the God who can and does. He trusts in a God who knows everything from the beginning to the end, and he's a God who actually is loving and kind and merciful, and he proved that by showing Daniel this dream and its interpretation. And so Daniel, in one sense, knows that no matter what happens to him, whether he continues to live or he dies at the hands of King Nebuchadnezzar, that it doesn't matter. In either way, he is still safe and secure in the hands of a powerful, merciful God in whom he trusts. You see, Daniel realizes that the real hero of the story is not him. It's definitely not Nebuchadnezzar, but it's God, a God who is worthy of praise. And so let's take a moment and see why Daniel does describe our third person in the story, a praiseworthy God, this way. And we begin to see why Daniel says God is worthy of praise by looking at verses 20 to 23. Here, Daniel, after receiving this vision from God, its interpretation, the dream, Daniel does this. Before he does anything else, it says he blesses the God of heaven, or he praises the God of heaven. He basically stops. He must have been excited to receive this dream and interpretation. And I think if I was me, I would have been partly like ready to bolt and run for the king Nebuchadnezzar to tell him so I could save my neck. And what does he do? No, he stops and he gives praise and glory and honor, and he worships God because God is worthy, and he knows this is more important than even telling the king first. And here's what he says: "Blessed be, or praise be, the name of God forever and ever." Why? "To whom belong wisdom and might," or power. That this is a God who changes times and seasons. He removes kings and he sets up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells within him. In other words, he says, God, you are the one who is powerful, in control of all things. All of history is not just something you know, but you are actually working it out. You raise up the rulers and you bring them down. Everything happens according to your plan, and you are the king who is sovereign, king over all things. You know everything, even the deepest, darkest secrets of this world. You know them all, and in your wisdom, you choose to reveal them as you choose to reveal them. And this is the God who is worthy of praise. This is the God, he says in verse 23, that I give thanks to and praise, because God has revealed these things to him and given him wisdom and might, so that he might make known this word to the king. You see, what Daniel is admitting here is that if you really want to have any kind of attempt at being poised and calm and humble and confident in this life, you need to realize who is really in charge. And it's not you and it's not me. It's him. And when you begin to realize that God is in charge, then you also realize that this God proves that he's in charge in a number of ways. One, he tells this dream and its interpretation, and he does what no one else could do. Because when Daniel does share this dream with the king and its interpretation, the king admits that this is the dream. This is what he said. And as he does this, we start to see what the dream also tells us about God. Because as the dream is described, it says, here's this massive image, this head of gold, the head and shoulders of silver, the middle section of bronze, and then the legs and the feet of iron, and then iron and clay. And as Daniel shares this dream, he tells Nebuchadnezzar, you're the head of gold. And at that point, I imagine Nebuchadnezzar would have been like, all right, head of gold, top of the hill. And then we sort of seem to skip over the silver and bronze empires that are going to come after him pretty quickly, although most commentators, there is debate, most commentators do believe that that's probably the Medes and the Persians, that's the silver, and then the Greek empire, that's the bronze, and then the Roman empire is the iron and the clay. And all of these things are basically saying, here's all these kingdoms that are going to come, one after another. But what's really striking is this. For all the beauty and brilliance of this image, it says it was exceedingly bright. And it was just like a sight to behold. It was glorious in all kinds of ways, it seems. There's this rock that's cut out without human hand. And that rock comes and smashes into the base of this image. And it doesn't just knock it over. What does it say? It breaks it into such small pieces that in a sense turns it all of it, from top to bottom, into dust. And that dust is blown away as in a summer breeze. Just a gentle breeze. That's enough to blow it away because it's such fine dust. What's it saying? Here you have all the kingdoms of the world lined up, the next 4 major empires. God's saying this is what's going to happen. But none of them are going to stand before the kingdom of God itself. None of them are going to even be able to stand before him. And not only are they going to stand before him, but those are going to be utterly wiped out to such a great degree that they'll be like dust blowing in the wind as compared to this rock that smashes into them. And then this rock grows and becomes this mountain and fills the entire world. And so what God is saying to Nebuchadnezzar, and in a sense to us here today, is he's saying, look, I'm not just in charge of this world. I'm not just one who brings kings, raises them up and brings them down, and you can see this succession of kingdoms. But he says, I'm going to bring into this world a new kind of kingdom with a new king, a king who will never be replaced, a kingdom that will go on forever and ever. You see, what he's saying is, look, all these kings and kingdoms and all their glory and all their brilliance are nothing compared to the God who is king over this universe and the God who will bring a kingdom on this earth and will make this kingdom, even though it starts small, grow and fill the entire world, and will have a king on the throne who will reign forever and ever. And we know that this is the reality of what God is not only predicting here and saying will happen and promising will happen, but we know this is the reality because history proves it out. Because this is exactly what happened. Because during that Roman Empire, God does break into this world. And God breaks into this world by coming into this world himself. The king of the universe becomes a baby born in a manger stall. The king lives 30 of his 30-odd years, 33 years approximately. He lives 30 of those years relatively, completely, really in one sense, unknown. He doesn't seek fame or status or position. He doesn't seek political power or position. He doesn't raise up an army to fight for him. And he does all of this not because he doesn't have the power to do it, not because he doesn't have the ability to do it or even the authority to do it. He does it because he says, my kingdom is a different kind of kingdom than the world's kingdoms. My kingdom is an upside down kingdom compared to the rest of the world. My kingdom is a kingdom in which the first will be last and the last will be first. In my kingdom, says Jesus, the king, he says, look, those who try to exalt themselves, they're going to be humbled. And those who are willing to humble themselves, they're going to be exalted. And in that king, the king actually comes and he says, I didn't come here to be served, but to actually serve and give my life as a ransom for the very people who rebel against me in my kingdom. The people who try to set up their own earthly kingdoms. He says, I've actually come to give my life for them. For all those people who try to gain advantage, win, and power in and of their own strength and their own abilities, people even like Nebuchadnezzar, this God, Jesus, comes and says, I will give my life for you. I will show you what true power does in love and in mercy and in grace. And he proves his power to be this king and to be the one who's given his life for you by rising from the dead. And not only rising from the dead, but now reigning and ruling in power and glory at the right hand of God the Father, at the throne of heaven, waiting the day when he will return and judge the nations and bring his kingdom fully into existence. That it's now, as it started small as this rock that is growing to become this mountain, that at one day he will return and it will fill the entire universe and it will be the kingdom that lasts forever, and every eye will see and every knee will bow and know and confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, the King of all the universe. That is the truth. That is the claim. That is what Daniel is getting a taste of in this dream and interpretation. And so is everybody who's listening to it. So are we who are here today. And this is the God who is worthy of worship. This is the God who is worthy of everything that we are. And that is why the final section of our sermon today is this. What is a fitting response to this truth? How do you respond to what you hear? And let me give you a number of ways. One, the right response is to do what Daniel does in verses 20 to 23, worship God. But what does it mean to worship him? You see, Nebuchadnezzar, at the end of the story, he seems to be worshiping God too, but if you look closely, it's not really a worship of God. He pays homage to Daniel and to Daniel's God. And he gives gifts and he says, wow, this is amazing. But at its heart, Nebuchadnezzar's not really worshiping God. We might say he's admiring God. You say, well, what's the difference? Well, let me put it to you this way, because I think this is relevant and it could be our issue too. Sometimes we think admiring someone or something is really truly worshiping them, but it's not. And a Danish philosopher and Christian philosopher, Soren Kierkegaard, put it this way, and I think it's really helpful. He says, there's a difference between an admirer and a follower, and it's this. The admirer never makes any true sacrifices. He always plays it safe. Though in words, phrases, songs, he is inexhaustible about how highly he prizes Christ. He renounces nothing, gives up nothing, will not reconstruct his life, will not be what he admires, and will not let his life express what it is he supposedly admires. Do you hear the difference? Do you hear what he's saying? He's saying you could think you're worshiping God by admiring him, by thinking even nice things about him, by saying nice things about him, by actually being, in a sense, a person who could say, wow, isn't Jesus even amazing? And isn't God amazing? And you could say all these kinds of things, and you could sound like you're worshiping him, but at the heart of it, you're not. Why? Because there's no change. There's nothing going on in your heart and life that changes. You're the same you were before. There's no sacrifice on God's behalf. There's no willingness to change your life. There's no willingness to actually submit to God's plan to change your life and to make you into a new kind of person, more like Jesus. You act like you're worshiping, but your heart and your actions are actually showing that you're not worshiping because there's nothing changing in you. Because who you worship will change you. If you really truly worship the God of heaven, the King of kings and the Lord of lords, then you will be changed in how you live your life. And so we're warned not to be like Nebuchadnezzar, to actually be someone who recognizes our deep need for change, and that we have a God who willingly does a work in us as we worship him to change us and to make us more like him. That actually one of the clear signs that you're actually willing to worship God and really worship God when we think about power and position and status, which is our theme throughout this story today, is this. When you really worship God, you're willing to play the background. When you really worship God, you're willing to actually say, not my will, but your will be done. And if I don't get any credit, if I don't get any glory, if I'm in a sense forgotten in the midst of it all by all the other people around me, I don't care. Because all I really want to do is worship you. All I really want to do is see you glorify God. All I really want, you deserve the credit. And so if in the end I'm forgotten, I know you'll never forget me. It doesn't matter what people think. It doesn't matter what position or status I have. It doesn't matter what role I play. It doesn't matter. I don't care. As the psalmist says, I'd rather be a doorkeeper in the house of our God than dwell in the tents of the wicked, to be far away from you. I want to just be close to you. I don't need a position of power. I don't need a position of status. I don't need a name. I don't need a reputation. I just want to worship you. You say, well, what does that look like? How do you live that out? What does it look like to actually apply this truth of God's amazing grace and how that can change you into somebody who lives differently when it comes to status and power and reputation? Well, let me give you a few ways. One, when we're tempted to win at all costs, when we live our lives where we're just striving to win at all costs, where we want to make sure that we're the top and no one else is going to beat us, then we have to remember this. Jesus says these words. This is what he wants his followers to do. Luke 9:23-25. If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross daily, and follow me. Whoever would save his life will lose it. Whoever loses his life for my sake will save it. For what does it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses or forfeits his soul? When you're tempted to think that you need to win, Jesus is saying, you better make sure that you know what you're trying to win. Because if you're trying to win the world, you'll never get it. You'll always come up empty-handed in the end. But when you lose yourself to him and submit yourself to him, you win because you belong to him. And he willingly actually even says to you, follow me, take up your cross, and be with me. And then he even says to you, you can reign with me. I'll raise you up to reign with me as you humble yourself and follow him. taking up your cross daily and willingly doing so out of love and thankfulness and worship of him. Second, when we think about power, position, and status, one of the things we struggle with is when we're asked to do something that we feel is beneath us. You know that happens. Someone says, hey, could you do this? And we know we can't really say no because we're not supposed to, right? It's a good thing. But it just feels like somebody less qualified could do that. Someone without my skills or abilities could do that. I mean, that's kind of beneath me. We don't say that. We kind of, if we're a little bit more self-aware, we might give off a little bit of a, don't really want to do that. That's a lousy job. I'm going to let that schmuck over there do that. But it's in us, isn't it? Right? That's beneath me. I don't want to do that. And I think when that comes to our minds and we're sort of puffed up, we're like, that's beneath me, we need to remember what Jesus did. What did Jesus the King do? On the night before he suffered and died, gathered with his friends, his 12 disciples in that upper room, including the one who would betray him, he took off his outer garment, he wrapped a towel around his waist, he took a big bowl of water, and he goes and he washes their grimy, dirty feet, the lowest job in the place, the lowest of the lowest jobs. The lowest servant would do that job. And yes, the disciples were surprised, feeling a little guilty because none of them offered to do it for everybody else. But Jesus willingly does it. And why does he do it? He's not doing it to shame them. He's doing it to actually help them realize that if you really want to be great, if you really want to be great in God's kingdom, then you got to be willing to get down on your knees and do the crappy jobs. And to do it out of love. To do it because you actually love God and love the people around you, even though they got stinky, smelly feet. You see, what he's saying in one sense, Jesus, to us, is that he came to serve and to be a servant to us. Why? To show us what it really means to love people. And what it really means to love people is to be willing to do those things that you feel are beneath you and to realize, actually even more than that they're not beneath you, but these are opportunities for you to serve and to give of yourself for the sake of God's kingdom and for the sake of people around you, no matter how lousy the job is. Are we willing to serve that way? To get down on our hands and knees, so to speak, that way? Third, sometimes it's easy when we're thinking about position and power and status to use people, to make sure that when we want something done, we get the right people in place that will do the right job, and that's a good thing. But then when they don't do it or they don't do it well enough, we find someone to replace them, and we just treat people like pawns rather than as people. We don't really love them, we use them. And when we're tempted to do that kind of stuff, when we're tempted to live that kind of way, and I think it's so important to remember again what Jesus did. Because Jesus comes to us and he says, I didn't come to be served, but to give my life as a ransom for you. I didn't come to use you. I didn't come to actually make use of you. I came to sacrificially give my life for you. People aren't pawns. People aren't there to be used, but people are there to be sacrificially loved. And when we struggle to do that, we look to Jesus who's sacrificially loving us. And as we see him doing that for us, instead of using us, instead of actually giving us what we deserve and giving us his grace, we realize that we then, in response to his amazing sacrificial love for us, we can sacrificially love other people rather than abuse or use them. Finally, when we get angry, because things aren't going your way, when angry because people aren't doing what you want them to do, when you get angry because things aren't going to work out the way you think they're going to work out and your whole plan is falling apart, and you get angry because that's the only thing that you think you can do in those moments when you're getting angry like that and it's in us, then we need to remember in one sense and see in our mind's eye Jesus. We need to see him on the cross. And here is the King of Kings, the Lord of glory, who is all authority belongs to him. All praise belongs to him. Everything in creation ought to turn and worship him, and we ought to see him on that cross looking down at us who are standing below that cross and in a sense shaking our fists at him because we are the people who put him there. We put him there. All of our wanting new kingdoms, all of our building our own kingdoms, all of our own goals and aspirations that have nothing to do with him and his kingdom, all of those things put him on that cross. And what does he do in response? He doesn't come and condemn us as we deserve, but instead he hangs there dying and suffering on a cross, and in the greatest display of love, he stays there. And he willingly gives his life fully for the very people who are treasonous towards him, the people who rebel against him, us. And he stays there to the very end, paying the very price to the very bottom until it's completely done, until it's completely finished. So that not only can you be forgiven, not only can you actually be forgiven, but you can actually be taken with him and united to him and raised up with him to reign and to rule with him. That's what he's giving those who trust in him. That's what he offers those who look to him in humble faith and trust. That's the king who, when you see him doing that for you, is the one who then can say to us, when you begin to feel like you are angry justifiably at other people around you for their failures or for your own failures that you blame on them, then stop and see the king who gave his life for you, that you might be humbled. You might be willing not only to accept and receive God's forgiveness and grace to you that you desperately need, but you are willing to extend grace to other people around you as an antidote to the anger that so easily grabs hold of you. And when you see and experience that love and grace more and more deeply, your anger becomes something that is, in a sense, increasingly pushed away by God's grace and his love as he pushes it away, showing you the wonder of his grace and love to you. You see, this passage is absolutely astoundingly amazing because it tells us that if we try to live like Nebuchadnezzar, it's going to end in dust. But if we are willing to submit ourselves to God and humbly trust him as Daniel did, then we can experience God's love and grace and mercy and power as he forgives us and lifts us and brings us up to himself and causes us to reign and to rule with him in a kingdom that will last forever. Serving him, loving him, and humbly confident no matter our circumstances because he is the king and we are always safe and secure in his powerful, gracious, loving hands. Let's pray. Father in heaven, it is, I believe, at least for myself, way too easy to hear what I've heard this morning, even from my own lips, and say, that belongs to somebody else. Forgive me. And I pray, Father, that you would impress whoever needs to hear this today, that you'd impress these truths upon our hearts, that you be gracious enough to really bring us down to the bottom, expose us, reveal it. And as you do, as you humble us, you would then show us also your amazing forgiveness, mercy, and grace. And you would help us to see that you are actually the God who brings us out of the dust and makes us into new creatures as part of your new kingdom to worship and serve you as the King of glory forever and ever. And I pray that you would cause us to be people who become people who want to worship you, willingly sacrifice for your kingdom's sake and your glory, willing to say, not my will, but your will be done, and willing to begin to change to become people who have a humble confidence, who have a willingness to serve sacrificially, willing to get on our hands and knees and do the lowest jobs, recognizing ultimately that we are following in the footsteps of our Savior and King Jesus, who gave his life for us. Father, in your mercy and your grace, make this truth hit home in our hearts, minds, and souls today, that we might be people who love you and worship you and live for you forever. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.